Good afternoon, buenas tardes, and thank you for tuning in today. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, the Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual afternoon with Maggie Smith to discuss Keep Moving, Notes on Loss, Creativity, and Change, published by our friends at Atria. When Maggie Smith, the award-winning author of the viral poem Good Bones, started writing inspirational daily Twitter posts in the wake of her divorce, they unexpectedly caught fire. In this deeply moving book of quotes and essays, Maggie writes about new beginnings as opportunities for transformation. Maggie Smith is the award-winning author of several books of poetry, including Good Bones, The Well Speaks of Its Own Poison, Lamp of the Body, The List of Dangers, and Nesting Dolls. A 2011 recipient of a creative writing fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, Maggie has also received several individual excellence awards from the Ohio Arts Council, 2 Academy of American Poets prizes, a Pushcart Prize, and fellowships from the Sustainable Arts Foundation and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. In conversation with Maggie this afternoon is Dr. Lucy Kalanithi. She is the Clinical Associate Professor of Medicine at Stanford University and an advocate for culture change around healthcare value. She is the widow of Dr. Paul Kalanithi, author of the #1 New York Times bestselling memoir, When Breath Becomes Air, which was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize and translated into more than 40 languages, and for which she wrote the epilogue. Dr. Kalanithi has implemented novel healthcare delivery models in primary care, hospitals, and health systems, and she serves on many leadership boards. Her new podcast, Gravity, explores narratives of suffering. We'll have some time to take audience questions after the talk, so please go ahead and put in your questions anytime during the broadcast in the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. You can order your copy of Keep Moving from Books and Books below by pressing the green button at the bottom of the screen. Every purchase you make keeps Books and Books up and running, so we thank you. You can also press the donate button anytime, and any amount is welcome. Remember, indie bookstores need your help now more than ever, so we're particularly grateful that Maggie and Lucy have made time to be with us today. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the stage. Hello.
The stage. The stage. What's your stage? Tell us about your stage, where you are right now. I'm so thrilled to be with you today, by the way.
I am too.
I'm such a big fan,
we could be
and
in the
it's just
same room.
wonderful.
I wish
Instead,
you
we
were
work kind of
in my
matching
office. Yeah, this is my office, which is just all windows and looks out on my front porch and the street in front of my house, so I can watch people walking their dogs as I talk to you today.
So pretty. So pretty. And you live in your hometown, right?
I do, more or less. I'm in a slightly different suburb, so I'm technically about 20 minutes away from my hometown, but I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in one of the suburbs around it, so I've been here for all 43 years of my life.
Love it.
I know, it's a strange thing.
Well, it is so nice to be here with you, and I feel like, I was one of the people who followed Keep Moving in real time before you even thought of it as a book. And I'd love to talk with you about that process, of course. And you're also, I used to be really intimidated by poetry, and I think a lot of people are. And I think for many people, you as a poet, but also like a person, have invited so many people to love your poetry and love poetry in general. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
And so this is so beautiful. Maybe we can start with a reading, and then we can kind of talk about how this came to be and who you have been along the way.
Oh, that would be lovely. Thank you. Thanks for making time. I'm going to read some excerpts from the first essay in the book, and I'm going to jump around a little bit. And the essay is called The Long Book. When my daughter was in second grade, she struggled with anxiety, at bedtime, about death in particular, but also about the future in general. I would tuck her in at night and lie with her in the dark, holding her, listening. When will I die? She'd ask. Will you definitely die before me because you're older? The questions kept coming. Will we miss each other when we are dead? Will we even know we're dead? When will it happen? Will we feel it? Life is long, a long book, I told her. And you're only on the first chapter. Who wants to ruin a book by worrying about the end the whole time? Who wants to know how a book will end? That would be boring, she said. And of course, she was right. Life is a book, long if we're lucky, and we write it as we go. The ending isn't written, waiting for us to arrive. I'd known this all along, logically, but I hadn't felt it yet. I thought that I knew my story. I thought that what I was living was the whole story, but it was only a chapter. To revise means literally to look at again, to re-envision. Revision has always been my favorite part of writing. I know some writers love the rush of the new idea, the getting it down, the honeymoon period with a story or poem when it's still sparkling. But for me, the problem solving is what I love most. The challenge posed by the not right words and the not right order. I believe in the importance of revision, but here's something I believe just as strongly. If you're not careful, you can revise the life right out of a piece of writing. If you're not careful, you can scrub all the weirdness and wildness right out of it. As counterintuitive as it sounds, you can polish it dull. The same applies to our lives. If we're not careful, we can revise the life right out of them. We can polish our lives dull. When I think about revising my life, I think about learning to see it anew and to see in it possibilities I could not see before. For almost all of my adult life to this point, I told my story in first person plural, we. Now the we is an I. Now the only plural is possessive, our children. And yet, of course, the children are not ours. We do not own the children any more than we own each other, which is to say, not at all. But I know one thing for certain, our stories belong to us. I'm the protagonist in my life, or damn well should be, and you're the protagonist in yours. Whether you're on the first draft of your life, or the second, or the 10th, it's yours to keep writing, and all of its messiness, and fragility, and terror, and beauty. Our lives may not unfold the way we'd hoped or expected, but the alternative, flipping to the end of the book, knowing the ending before we get there, is not only impossible, but joyless, polished, dull. As my daughter said in her 8-year-old wisdom, that would be boring. Revising our stories, our lives, is no easy task. Our stories may take strange turns. We may find that we are living part mystery, part romance, part comedy, part tragedy, part ghost story. We don't know what will happen next or how it will end, but we keep moving. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's so much to talk about. I think maybe we could start with, could you just describe where you were, what was happening to you, with you at the time that you started writing the words that ended up in here? Because I think this sentence, I thought that I knew my story, and then in this first essay you say suddenly there were so many blank pages. And can you talk about like what that was like and why?
Yeah, I mean, I started writing I call them notes to self, the quotes that are in the book, when I knew I was going to get divorced, but I was not yet divorced. So I was in that liminal space where we were still living in the same house. And maybe people don't know that when I started writing these, we were cohabitating. Yeah, that was not good. We were still living together. We knew it was over. When I was writing these in the beginning, we hadn't even told the children. So it was like something I was really internally processing. Most of my neighbors didn't even know that this was happening. And so I was just in such a place where I needed to sort of pep talk myself every day just to function as a human being, and as a writer with deadlines, and as a parent with two small kids. The kids were 5 and 9 at the time. And so I just started writing. The first one was something about using grief and anger as fuel and sort of burning it throughout the day to keep yourself moving. And that's where the phrase keep moving came from. And then I just ended every one of them with keep moving, because for me, it was about not physically staying active, but not looking in the rear view mirror.
Yeah.
Not going into that dangerous, nostalgic, questioning space where you think, what if I had X? What if they had X? What if I hadn't X? What if I had never done this? What if I had made a different decision 20 years ago? I mean, all of that that's back there, and it's a mess. And I realized that I needed to just keep my eyes right around me in the invisible, this sort of bubble that I was around, and in the space ahead of myself. And that's what writing these kind of helped me do, was keep pressing forward. And also, I think something that was important to me when I started writing these was self-compassion. Because I think when we're going through really hard times, we tend to be very difficult on ourselves. And it's like if my best friend had come to me and said, my marriage is ending, or I lost my job, or I don't think I could do this anymore, or parenting is not at all what I thought it was going to be, or whatever the trouble was, I would have sat that person down and said, you've got this. You're amazing. You can do this. How can I help? But when things happen
Here's
to
your
us,
chocolate. Yeah.
Here's your chocolate.
Yeah.
Sit down. If you need to scream into a pillow. But when we are going through difficult times, I think too often we tell ourselves the most unkind story about ourselves, which is like, well, if you were a different kind of person, this wouldn't have happened. And we feel a lot of like guilt and shame, and we beat ourselves up a lot about when things don't go the way that we hoped they would. And so for me, it was sort of like practicing being nicer to myself than I even felt I deserved at the time, but I knew I needed it.
It's so wild because you also ended up doing that in real time. And it's funny to hear you use the word liminal, because I feel like liminality is like the space between two things. It's very clear that at the beginning, you didn't know what the other thing was, right? Like you wrote your way into what it was, and kind of like how you even see life, it seems like. And, so at first were you writing, so when you say I was writing these, like just to show people the book in case they don't have it already and they can see the link by it, I think it's right there.
Yeah.
It's like little bite-sized, because that's probably the right size at the beginning, right?
Yep.
Notes to self where they're in the second person. So you're sort of speaking to the reader, but then obviously the reader was you when you were first writing them. And then pretty shortly thereafter, you started tweeting them every single morning. Is that right?
I started tweeting them from the first day. I never wrote them anywhere. I just wrote them on Twitter, and then I would copy paste them from Twitter into a Word document. Yeah, I would open Twitter and I would type it in with my little thumbs, usually in bed first thing in the morning. And that would sort of set my intention for the day. And, people have asked, like, why didn't you just write that in a journal?
Right.
Why did you blast that out? Yeah, like a normal person. And honestly, it's funny. I'm a writer, but I've never kept a journal. I don't keep a diary. So really for me, it was important to share it, not because I thought they would speak to other people or come off as advice to other people, but because I wanted to hold myself accountable for whatever that intention was for the day. And I felt like I couldn't hide from it if I blasted it out in front of other people. But also because most people in my life, except for my very inner circle, had no idea I was having a hard time and had been for months.
This is so interesting.
It was a complete
Yeah.
secret. I mean, I didn't even tell my mother for months because I just kept thinking I can fix this and then no one will have to know. I mean, that's
Wow. Was it on
crazy.
Twitter before you told your mom?
I think no. I think I told my mom around the same time I started posting the
It's
tweets.
so
Like,
interesting.
yeah, I mean, it was a strange sort of timeline, but I I wanted I thought it was important to come out as struggling, even though people at
Mhm.
first didn't know what the struggle was, because so
Mhm.
much of what we do on social media by nature is self-promotional and
Yeah,
like,
like
hey, look at this
shiny
great
and
thing that
perfect.
happened. Yeah, like
Mhm.
look at I
Mhm.
mean, the rest of my house doesn't have fresh flowers in it. I only have fresh flowers where you can see them. Like, you don't want to know what's on the other side of that door
We
because I'm
totally
not
do,
posting it.
actually.
Oh, I mean, you totally do. You'd be horrified. You don't show the sink full of dirty dishes. You don't
Yeah,
tell people
yeah.
about the promotion you didn't get or the rejections to the
Mhm.
poems that nobody wanted.
Mhm.
You tell them when
Mhm.
good things happened. And so it felt important to me to sort of better align
Mhm.
my online self with
Cool.
what the real person in my daily life was going through. And it felt completely disingenuous that fall to be living the way I was living, which is to say, like, in the fetal position. And then to be
Mhm.
like, oh, I got a poem taken.
Mhm. Like,
Here's
I'm
the
a lovely
link.
poet. Mhm.
It
Mhm.
just felt like so
Mhm.
disjointed. Like I
Mhm.
had these two selves operating in the world.
Mhm.
And so these posts were really the you is me. I'm talking to myself.
Mhm.
And it was a way to just be a whole person in the world.
I love it. And I think that is why it ends up not being preachy, even though you say it's not advice. It is in a way, but it's not preachy. It's really kind of gritty. Um, and it's in real time, which is so interesting to follow. And I heard you tell Saeed Jones when you were talking on Thursday at another event for Keep Moving, you said something like, if you could make a word cloud of what the Keep Moving notes looked like at the beginning as they moved along, the words were different. The tenor was different. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I mean it's funny if I look into that original Word document, which I eventually stopped keeping. If I look into that original Word document and I look at fall of 2018 into winter of 2019, that sort of hinge,
Mhm.
the words grief and anger and confusion and fear come up over and over and over again. Like I
Mhm.
can tell that sort of like really bad dark Venn diagram of emotion I was experiencing at the time,
Mhm.
which was like, what now? Like I have no idea what's happening. And
Mhm.
if I look at the following fall, a year later, and I look at the words I'm using in those posts, I see
Mhm.
words like hope and possibility and light and
Mhm.
space and freedom, which
Mhm.
are not words that were even in my vocabulary 9 months
Mhm.
prior.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I never wrote any of this as advice to other people for how to get through a hard time. I just talked myself through it day by day and sort of it felt often like I was wearing a headlamp that only lit
Mm.
like that's basically like the three steps I would take that
Mhm.
day.
Mhm.
And I had
Mhm.
no idea what the next day would look like, but I just you really only need to see two steps in front of you, and you could travel miles and miles and miles like that. You actually don't need to
Right.
see that
You also
far
have to keep
ahead
moving though, right?
to keep moving, right?
Yeah.
You just need enough light around you to not
Yeah.
fall flat on your
Yeah.
face and to know where not to fall into a hole. And so that's really where this book was written in real time in little steps as I kind of
Mhm.
walked myself a few steps at a time through, I mean, the hardest year I've lived. And now here we are, and the book is being released in one
Mhm.
of the hardest years we collectively, not even nationally, but globally,
Totally.
are living. And it's in some ways it feels like it's strange, but it feels kind of to me like the just right time
That's wild.
um, for this book that I thought, it's not a divorce book. It's about a lot of different kinds of loss and a lot of different kinds of struggles, but I think so much of it, I hope, applies to just what we all feel when we don't know what our lives are going to look like in a month or 6 months or a year, which we don't.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't.
Totally. And I think it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think that's right. I've heard you say it before, where like, this is not a divorce book. It's an upheaval book. It's about what happens when the unthinkable happens, something you literally never thought would happen. And it has. And now you have to essentially think your way into it or write your way out of it. Like, you're the same you, but with the future looking totally different. You actually are not the same you that you supposed you are. So can you, okay, this is a long way of asking. Can you talk about the pieces of yourself that you either had to remind yourself of or reshape or whatever? Because I think anybody who's gone through a form of grief or loss, like divorce, like yours, or like many others that you mentioned, loss of a job, loss of a different other person, whatever it might be, 2020 writ large.
Yeah.
It's very tied up in identity, which I think is always surprising. And when you talked about how you felt not only sadness, but also anger and a lot of fear. C.S. Lewis said, nobody told me that grief looked so much like fear. And I personally think that comes out of the loss of identity part of like, whoa, like I am not even standing on solid ground. So how did you figure that out? Because that's not easy.
No, I mean, I think part of what was important to me and part of why I went to writing as a way to move my way through this is because writing is the thing that makes me feel most like me. You know, spending time with my kids also, but just like, what can you do? What is that thing that you do? You know, like for some people, it might be running or hiking or birding, or, I mean, whatever the thing is, what is the thing that you do that makes you remember who you are in some core place, untethered to other people, and maybe even untethered to your work, which is also not guaranteed. You know, so many of us,
Right.
I think, you know, it's like you lose your job and you don't know who you are, or you're a mother or a father and your kids go off to college and don't need you on a daily basis anymore. And suddenly you don't know who you are and where you fit and what to do. And I think for me, part of it was thinking about and insisting on the idea that I predated this traumatic change in my life. That like I existed,
Like I'm still me.
yeah, I existed before. I existed before the marriage in my case. Like, wait a minute, but I'm Maggie. I'm not just this person's wife or this person's mom. I'm Maggie. So what can I do to remind myself that I'm Maggie? And that if I lived before that, just fine, really, then then maybe that will help me know that I can live after it too. Like I wasn't born this person's partner. I know how to live without that person because I did it for 22 years. So for me, writing was the thing that really helped remind me of that person. And then I actually thought a lot about like, what things did I maybe sacrifice or let go of or shelve in service of that relationship that I can now go back and sort of like excavate and recover. And so it started, you know, it's like diving into the wreck. Like what couldn't I do?
Can you share an example?
Can I
Can you share an example?
Yeah, like for example, feeling zero guilt about spending time on my writing or traveling in support of it was something that I could not do in that relationship. And so being able to say like, no, actually, I'm going to give time and space to this. It's really important. You know, even just stupid things like when someone doesn't like a particular like perfume or a particular item of your clothing and you're like, oh, I'm wearing those overalls. I don't care. because I can be cute for myself. You know, I can actually just dress for myself now, and I can wear my hair however I want. And I can, you know, if I want to watch X television show tonight, I can do that because, you know, as I say in the book, the Miss Life is no longer a group project, which, you know, I mourned the loss of that, but also like now it means the decision making is up to me. And as terrifying as that was, and sometimes still is, it's also exhilarating, like to just get to have this, to have your say in a way that maybe you couldn't before. So for me, it was about that. It was about, okay, so who was this person I was, and what maybe can I get back that I gave up, if anything. And that's been fun. And also just insisting on joy has been a really important. Yeah. You know,
I think people responded a lot to the notes where you said that. Like, can you talk about that, or what you heard from people, or what that's about?
Yeah. I mean, it feels important to me now too, because I think when we're going through difficult times, and when we're collectively going through a difficult time, sometimes we feel guilty about enjoying ourselves. You know, I mean, if somebody asks me now, how are you doing? I feel like I'm like, good. Should I say that? Should I be laughing? There's so much suffering, and I want to acknowledge
Right. This
that.
happens in grief. You're right. It happens this year.
Yes.
Totally.
You know, like it's still okay to laugh, and we need to. You know, and I think about the poet Toy Derricott wrote, "Joy is an act of resistance." And I think about that a lot, like, and not just in an election year, and not just because of the pandemic, but just in our individual lives, when you're really in the bottom of the well. One of the things that we need to help claw our way out of it is pleasure. Even if it's like little tiny bits of it, even if it's 15 minutes a day where you walk and you feel the sun on your face and you listen to music and you give yourself a little pocket of relief from the other stuff that you're feeling, and then not feeling guilt or shame. You know, one of the notes is like, you don't get extra credit for being miserable 100%
Oh, I love that
of the time.
100% of the time.
Like there is no like merit badge for just feeling 100% terrible all the time when you're going through something. Like we don't need to wear a black veil around every day and just get no pleasure. I mean, frankly, no one in our life wants us to live like that. No one who was in our lives should want us to live like that. Like the people that we love and the people who are no longer with us want the best for us. They want us to live. Like this is all we get as far as we know. So
I think kids are good teachers of this too.
Oh,
like, did you find this with your kids?
So
I mean, you're sort of
much.
forced to.
Yeah,
in a good way.
I mean, they live in the present. That's all they know. But also, I mean, so today's my
Right. They're
son's
like
birthday.
pleasure monsters too. Like they can do all of it at one time.
Exactly. I feel like maybe I should use this chance to say a shout out to my son Rhett, who turned 8 today. This is his birthday. But I asked him today, I said, do you feel 8? Do you feel older? And he goes, no, I feel about the same. I still feel 7, you know? He's just like,
Lucky dude.
they're so present. And so like, I don't know when he'll feel 8, but they really are so present. They're not thinking about what things were like last week or last year. They're really just trying to sort of wring the most out of any day that they can. And we can learn a lot from them in that regard, I think.
So I was rereading your book last night, and I came across the passage that talks about October 18th, which is today. And there's this piece about October. Do you know what page it's on?
I don't.
Oh my gosh. It's like, okay, I'm going to take 1 second to flip through and try to find it.
It's okay if you don't. I can basically
Please.
explain.
So
I can explain October 18th.
The significance for you of October 18th.
Yeah.
Please. And it's
so
like, it's so special to do this with you today and have this be one of the layers of October 18th.
October 18th is the day that my son was born. And it's also the day that my mother's mother died. And so, interestingly, the year my son was born, 2012, my nephew was born on my grandmother's birthday that year,
Wow.
January 24th. And then in October of the same year,
Wow.
another great grandchild she did not get to meet was
Wow.
born on the day she died. And the difference is my nephew just happened to be born on her birthday, but I chose her death day as my son's
So interesting.
birthday.
Why did you do that? Yeah.
Well, I knew it was going to be around then because of his
Mhm.
due date, and I had to schedule his birth. And so, because his sister had been a cesarean, so I was not a candidate to do it any other way. And thank goodness, because he was almost 10 pounds. We don't have to talk about that. But it was a blessing. So yeah, I had to schedule it. And I just thought, what a beautiful thing in one way to sort of honor her by allowing him to come into the world on that day. But it was also kind of a way, and I was thinking of my mom at the time, a way of reclaiming that day for something that wasn't sad, And so every year when I wake up on this day, I get really teary, in part because I'm thinking about my son, and in part because I'm thinking about my grandmother who didn't meet my son. But part of moving through difficulty, I think, is reclaiming things. So, for example, my wedding anniversary is now the day that I bought this house. And so I can have like house day, and I planned it like that so that I would have something positive on the day that, and I try to do that every year, like even just make plans, just so that and reclaiming songs, if there's a song or a movie or something that like reminds you of something painful, how can you take it and use it in a way that changes the meaning for you so that the memory shifts somewhat.
Can you talk about like what kind of things you're doing today or in general that you do on October 18th to honor that mix?
Yeah. So you can't smell me because this isn't Willy Wonka and there's no smell-o-vision. But if you could, you would know I am wearing Shalimar, which was my grandmother's perfume.
Oh.
And I bought a bottle and I wear it on Christmas Eve and on Thanksgiving and on her birthday and on the day she died. Just those 4 days because they're important days for her and they remind me of her. And so I'm kind of traveling around today in a little cloud that smells like hugging my grandmother, like
Your
what her
grandma.
sweater would feel like.
Wow.
So I do that. And then I saw my mom. I talked to her on the phone and I visited. And today was not a day that I have my son. He's with his dad. Just depends on how it falls every year. But I made him a lasagna and I went and picked him up for an hour and fed him lunch and read 2 chapters of the BFG to him and then dropped him back off with his dad. So I got to have a little bit of time with him. So I feel like I've had they're with me today.
Like a cozy family day.
Yeah.
And can you talk so much about in your book about your children and the ways that you teach them and the ways that they teach you, a lot about the ways they teach you. Are there particular things that Rhett has said or done or that your grandma said or did that helped you during this particularly hard time?
Rhett was only 5, so I can't really say that there were specific things that he said during that time that helped, but I will say he is a very loving, very sweet, very affectionate, kind of crawl into your lap at all times, even when you're trying to eat a meal kind of kid. And so
I want one of those. I have a spiky kid.
Yeah, Violet's a little cooler, but Rhett is he's a very big feeler and a very sweet kid. And so his level of affection over the past couple of years has been sort of life-saving. And I will say when in the early days of quarantine, when the kids were home every day and we were homeschooling and just sort of, in March, we were playing Legos on his floor once and he said something about, and I said, yeah, we're getting weirder in quarantine, Rhett. Like we were making some weird Lego thing. And I said, I think quarantine's making us weird. And he said, what? Don't say that. I'm not getting weirder. I'm getting better.
Awesome.
And I said, I don't know what you mean by that, buddy. Don't you miss your friends? Don't you miss hugging Mimi and Papa? And what do you mean you're getting better? And he goes, yeah, I miss school. I miss my friends, but I don't have to miss you.
Wow.
And it just, it broke my heart. And I thought, it never occurred to me that when my kindergartner or first grader was going to school, that there was a little tug while he was there, that we were not with him. And suddenly he has all of this family time.
Days.
Yeah. And I think, just seeing that silver lining and him showing that silver lining to me was really powerful. And, they say things all the time that I'm just like, who are you? Like, what did I do to deserve these small humans?
Totally. Hey, why is your book this color?
That's a good question. We had a talk fairly early on, my editor and I, about what we wanted this book to look like. And
it's tiny and really, it's like aesthetically poppy.
It feels like butter. It's neon orange. The interior of the US version is this like aqua black and white. It's really cheerful. That was super important to me. Like, I didn't want it to be a sad book. I really wanted it to have the spirit of being uplifting. And also, like, I'm a tattooed mom with a nose piercing. I really didn't think that the book should have watercolor flowers on the cover. Like, I just wanted it to have a certain...
Did you know that right away, or did they start sending you draft covers and you were like, no? Like,
no. We really had a conversation about design really early on about what it could and might look like. And I was so thrilled when Oliver Monday, whose work I love, agreed to design the interiors. And so he did all of the quote pages.
It's beautiful.
And so they're gorgeous. It's so much more than I thought it would be. And when the box came and I opened it and got to feel the books and just see the thing that had sort of been living in my head, and my little headlamp that I'd worn for a year and a half, that it looks and feels like this. Frankly, this book is bright enough, it might be able to lead you 2 steps at a time in a dark alley.
Totally, literally, metaphorically and literally. Totally.
Right.
It's such a nice little gift for your children too. Last night when I was looking at it again, for some reason that kept popping into my mind, like how special to have a mom lead you in this particular way. I don't know if they've seen it. Maybe they probably don't even care about it right now, but
they've seen it. I mean, they know it exists. They have not read it.
Yeah.
But eventually.
Yeah. Can I ask you one quick question out of interest? And then in a few questions, we can move to the audience. And I need to figure out how to actually see the chat screen. Because right now I can only see you, which I
just see a little ask a question down at the bottom of the screen.
Oh no. Okay. I'm just like going to break the whole wall right now because
the fourth wall is gone.
It's gone.
We'll figure it out.
Because I literally cannot see anything except you, and I will try, but I'm scared of like exiting myself.
Yeah,
Lucy,
I think
it's Christina.
Hi.
Can I ask you? You can't see ask a question on the bottom of the screen? Okay, well then I'll come back up and ask questions. So don't worry about it.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay. Maybe we could do that in 5 minutes or something. I'm sure there's interesting questions. I wanted to ask you maybe 2 things. Finally, one is, as a poet, can you talk about how this book is different from your poetry, or maybe different from poetry in general, and sort of what that meant to you to write this, and if you're going to write more like this?
Yeah, I mean, I always try to write poems first. I think that's my mode. So oftentimes if I have an idea for something, I try to make it a poem. And then if it doesn't work, I'm like, well, I guess maybe it's supposed to be an essay.
You and no one else.
Yeah, I don't think, it's, some people call the quotes poems, and I don't know if it's because I'm a poet and so that's the association.
Yeah, there's like all this metaphor. They're kind of really poetic.
Or because they're poetic, I think, but I don't think of them as poems. They're not poems. They're just notes to self.
What does poetic mean? Does it mean a thing other than like a poem?
No, I think it just means like a
Okay.
poem. Like to me, what's poetic about the quotes probably is that I would say they have sort of a metaphor-based center of gravity.
Mhm.
And I do, because I'm a poet, write with a lot of attention toward like the rhythm of sentences and repetition and
Mhm.
even just the sounds of vowels and how to get even like a little
Mhm.
internal
It's really
rhyme
clear.
in
Mhm.
things. I just don't know how to write
Mhm.
any other way. Um, what I will say about writing the essays in this book was I didn't, and I talked about this a little bit with Saeed, I didn't realize how much I had enjoyed the sort of cover of writing a poem
Mhm.
and not claiming myself as the speaker of the poem until I started writing
Mhm.
these really personal essays about, my divorce and miscarriage and postpartum depression and childhood anxiety and all the kinds of things I talk about in this book, just as myself. And
Yeah.
there is no distance between the
Mm.
I in the
There's no
book.
voice. Yeah.
There's no,
Uh-huh.
no. I mean, the person in this book, this is the most me thing I've ever written
Mhm.
for public consumption,
Mhm.
which is, kind of scary. It feels a lot like when you write a book, particularly memoir or something that's really personal, it sort of feels to me like you're putting a message in a bottle and kind of sending it out, and you don't know where it's going to wash up and who's going to receive it and how they're going to receive it and what they'll think of it and you. And it's been really heartening to have the response to the book be what it's been um, so far,
Mhm.
and to see it doing work I could not have imagined it doing, if that makes sense. Like just
Sure.
hearing from people who say, I lost this person this way and this is helping me today. Or
Mm.
I read, I started reading this and it helped me get through these 3 difficult hours. I mean,
Mhm.
whatever that little
Means so much
headlamp,
about that you'll never know.
so
Like
much.
a
I mean,
million that you won't know. Mhm.
exactly. And
Mhm.
it makes the act of sort of putting yourself
Mhm.
out there more than worth it when you see that it's like helped anyone other than yourself.
Mhm.
Oh.
Yeah. Um, I heard you describe yourself at one point, well, one as the Eeyore in your family, and then also as a recovered pessimist. Is that what you say? Could you talk about that, like your former life in pessimism, and then who you are now and how you see the world now in a different way?
Yeah, I mean,
It's kind of
yeah, I think
amazing, right? To like walk through fire and then end up not a pessimist, but there's something so interesting there anyway.
it
Yeah.
seems like it should have been reversed. Like I should have been an optimistic person and then my life fell apart and I was like, wow, everything's terrible. But instead, I was kind of, I call myself a recovering pessimist. I was kind of a pessimist, and then my life fell apart, and I required optimism to function, and so I I chose it really more than anything else. I think I have always done something that a lot of us do without even being conscious of it, which is use pessimism as self protection. Like we
Mhm.
practice worst case scenario thinking all the time in large and small ways. Like, oh, it'll probably rain and we won't get to go, or oh, I won't get the job, or oh, he won't call, or it's not going to work. We're not going to, like we're not going to get a vaccine in time. The kids aren't going to go back to school. We're not going to, we say these things to ourselves not because we even necessarily believe them, but because I think we're creating a little bit of armor so that if and when that bad thing happens, we have sort of
Yeah.
expected it because we've been clenched in a way. It's like, watching a scary movie and like clenching your body because you're waiting for the thing to pop out. And
Mhm.
what I realized when things went so wrong was I can't function like that. And really, I think I've been poisoning the
Mhm.
present moment by expecting the
Mhm.
next moment to be bad
Mhm.
when maybe it wasn't. And frankly, it often isn't. Like as many things can go right as can go wrong. So why focus on the stuff that can go wrong? It's not any more likely. than things just being okay.
Right. They
And
might as
by
well go away. Mhm.
they might even be better than you thought. And by thinking negatively in the meantime, you're just coloring the present with just all that stuff. And then if nothing bad happens, I guess you can sigh a sigh of relief, but then whatever that time period was, you just ruined it. Whereas if you just let yourself sit in the sun without worrying about when the next rainstorm might happen, you would enjoy your life a lot more. And so that's
Right.
kind of the headspace I'm trying to live in now, is just like, I don't know what's going to happen. It could be bad. It might be fine. Let's just take the present for what it is and not jump, like, let's not get ahead of ourselves, you know?
Which is really different from, I thought I knew my life story and I'm clinging to this thing. And I think it's interesting to hear you say you chose optimism, because in your writing, you also use the word courage a lot. And you talk about, I think you talk about how courage is muscular, or you need to like muscle your way into courage. Because I think actually it's really hard to choose optimism or hope. It's really vulnerable in the ways you're describing, right? There's no armor. And so it does feel like you did, like that's a courageous act, or you have to choose courage first, right? In order to even get close to optimism. I love it. I love hearing that. Maybe let's go to questions.
Sure. If there are some. Thank you, by the way. This was so much fun to chat.
Oh my gosh, you're the best, Maggie. It's so fun to talk with you.
Amazing. So here's a question. Form, typeface, font, margins, etc. is so important to me as a writer, and I'm fascinated that you initially wrote Keep Moving on Twitter. Can you say more about how you are influenced by the literal form of writing? This is from Allison McGee.
The literal form of writing. Well, when I'm working on a poem, let's say, I write longhand. My brain only really works very well with a pen in my hand. And part of that, as I have recently copped to, I never learned how to type. So my writing always starts out in a notebook looking really sloppy, or on an envelope, which I haven't even copied this into the computer yet. It's like a poem idea I got the other day. And so I honestly don't think about form very much in the beginning. I call it brain vomit. I'm just trying to get all of the stuff up here out before I lose it, because this is a mess. This is about as messy as my house, the rooms you can't see. And so I'm really just trying to get it down, and not until I get enough down do I think I have something that's starting to kind of like move toward each other and congeal. Do I even bother putting these two fingers to work, typing it into the computer? Writing the quotes on Twitter was not that hard, because the character count is so small that I can just use my little thumbs and get it in there and sort of futz around a little bit. But really writing a poem or an essay, I have to do everything pen to paper, because that's how my brain works. And then I go into the computer, and then it's Garamond 12. That's my font. Actually, I even have a tattoo on my. Can you
in
see?
Garamond?
It's actually in Garamond 41, which is the age I was when I got divorced.
Oh, amazing!
And so I went and I had vers libre put on my wrist, free verse.
What does it mean?
It means, it's French for free verse, which is a type of poem, but it also felt like free verse. It felt important to me at the time. In Garamond 41 for the age I was, and that's my font. And I'm like I think writers are very attached to font.
That's like so poet wonky. Garamond is the best though.
I think it is. People say sometimes it can be dangerous to draft in your font, because if you draft in Garamond, anything sounds good and looks beautiful in Garamond. So you need to put it into Times or Arial or something, and then you're like, oh no, that's not good at all. The Garamond just put a shine on it that wasn't there. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
that was an amazing answer.
Okay.
So interesting. So here's a question for both of you. Can you tell us what you're reading right now? If there's anything special that you are reading for inspiration or just for sustenance?
Oh, Lucy, what are you reading right now? I'm curious.
Oh, goodness.
No pressure.
Yeah. The thing that is stacked up. So I just got the book All We Can Save, which was edited by climate scientists who are women, and it includes poetry and essays and scientific and not about the climate crisis. And it's been exploding and selling out, and I think people are really hungry for processing emotion and building a new courageous narrative around the climate crisis. And I'm really excited about All We Can Save. And then I also now love poetry, and there's a anthology called, I think it's called Resistance, Rebellion, Life. I want to Google
I'm
it.
in that.
You're in that. Is Good Bones in that? It's so good. It's also
color.
tiny. It's also tiny and orange. Yeah.
It is.
But
It's
that's
such
an amazing poetry anthology, just about this particular moment as well, or about, any moment of upheaval, and particularly upheaval in service of justice. So those two things, which are kind of a piece.
Oh, I want to get the climate change book. I'm going to note to self that. I have, what have I been reading? Today, I was reading, and then I tweeted out a section of a poem by Yehuda Amichai. So I try to read some poems in the morning every morning, and then I read poems at night before I go to bed. It just, I don't know, kind of primes the brain. I feel like it's good nutrition for the body and mind and soul.
Not
and
only
heart.
scrolling Twitter.
No, not only scrolling
You're
Twitter
genius.
or online
correct.
shopping. So that's one that I've been reading, and I have so much poetry. The other book that I have a stack of books on my desk, so I'm reaching to grab. The other book that I just started is Approval Junkie, and I love this. The subtitle is My Heartfelt and Occasionally Inappropriate Quest to Please Just About Everyone and Ultimately Myself. So a little bit of poetry and a little bit of prose. I think my editor says all literature is self-help. And I've been thinking a lot about that as, reading is something we do to remind ourselves of what is possible in a human life, and reading as a way to sort of create new neural pathways and spark our imagination. And any kind of book, I think, can bring you peace if you lose yourself in it. It doesn't necessarily even have to be a book that is designed to do that for you.
It's beautiful. So Mike would like to know, what made you decide to post the notes on Twitter rather than in your journal, for example?
So I don't keep a journal. I mean, I keep a notebook to work on poems, but I felt like it was important to be transparent, I guess, as someone who is struggling. And I did it one day and didn't know I would do it again. When I posted the first tweet, I didn't think this is going to be a daily practice. I just did it because I thought about it. I wrote it and I posted it. And the response was really overwhelming, even just that first day. So then and it felt good. It felt good to have said it. It felt good to have thought my way through it throughout the course of the day. And it felt good to have people say, oh, I needed that. Or, oh, I wish I would have read that 5 years ago when I went through my own divorce, or when I, lost my husband, or when, my daughter went through this terrible illness, or whatever the thing was. And so somehow, between just doing it for myself and feeling good about it and having this sense of sort of purpose and community come out of it, because I was connecting with other people, even online, in that space, at a time where I felt very alone. And being able to connect with other people around ideas of fear and grief and hope and courage and sort of be there for each other in a space like Twitter, which we often think of, I think, as being toxic, and certainly is potentially toxic, but using that space for positive communication and interaction ended up being super useful for me as a person. Forget as a writer, just as a human being. And some of those connections that I made in those early weeks and months have turned into sort of like long-term Twitter friendships. And I know a lot of you know what that's like, to meet someone online, like Lucy, like to meet someone online thanks to writing, and thanks to something that you've written or said, and the person reaches out to you and says, that meant something to me. And I'm like, oh, well, that meant something to me. And so, you know, we've never met in person. We only have interacted on the phone and in the ether and in ways like this. And yet it is an authentic connection that you can make with another human being. And I think maybe this year it's really important to remember that we can do that when we are so separated, that we can still be keeping in touch and making connections with people even when we can't be together.
So here's a question from Chacha. Do you think you would have written a book if you never had a Twitter account?
Not this book. No, I would not have written this book without a Twitter account. I probably would have written something eventually about the experience of getting divorced, becoming a single parent, figuring out what to do. Maybe it would have been an essay collection. Maybe it would have been a memoir. Maybe it just would have been poems, because I have written poems about my divorce and I've published some of them and probably will continue to do that. But this book is very specific to sort of being born out of these quotes, and without a social media account, it wouldn't have happened. I guess another way of answering that is I wouldn't have written these quotes every day just for me, and then thought to compile them. The idea for the book really came from me posting them, and eventually people started saying, these should be a book. I wish I had these someplace else other than Twitter. Like, I keep screenshotting them and emailing them to my sister, or I keep, copy pasting them and texting them to my mom. And so really making the book was not my idea. I didn't think I was writing a book.
How long were you doing that before that idea took place? How long were you?
I started the tweets, I think, in September or October of 2018.
Okay.
And I had the book was in the works the first week of January. So it only took maybe 3 months.
Wow.
For it to be, placed with a press and an editor.
And who suggested it to you? Were there lots of people suggesting it, or was it one in particular that kind of pushed it forward?
No, people would just say, I wish I had this on my bedside table, or I wish this was a small book I could carry in my pocket and just have, or I wish I could give this. I wish this is the gift. Like, this is a book I wish I had when I got divorced. I wish I could give this to someone. And so I was like, oh, maybe there's something to this. So right around Christmas time that year, only a couple months after I started the tweets, I wrote a book proposal. And the rest of it just sort of happened.
Well, it's a beautiful book. We've been selling it really well
Thank
at Books and Books. We love it. So I just want to remind everyone watching that you can, if you don't have it yet, you can order it in the green button below. And the conversation was phenomenal. I've taken so many notes. I loved what you read at the beginning about, like, why would you want to know the ending of the story with your, I find that fascinating. The whole idea of just like, what is the purpose of our lives, and how do we get there, and how do we write these narratives? And, I can relate so much to everything that you have said about reclaiming, moving through, and difficulties like reclaiming things, joy is an act of resistance. I've just been making tons of notes. So thank you so much for sharing of yourself so openly today. I thought that, Lucy, your questions were wonderful. It was just a lovely, lovely conversation. So I want to thank you. And then I want to show you that this is my grandmother. So as you were talking, she was right behind me, and that part was really interesting too. So anyway, I think that we are all connected now more than ever, and I hope that we will see you in person soon, maybe next year in Miami.
I hope so too.
Keep writing, keep moving, stay safe, and thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Goodbye.